Hey everyone, this is the summary of chapter 16, 17, and 18. So we're going to jump into this. This is basically where we get a little bit more information about the mob. We're not going to read too much about this, but Alexandra was very upset that the kids were around Atticus during the mob scene that we read in the last chapter. But the part that we are going to focus in on a little bit is the courthouse, and the kids obviously aren't supposed to go. Atticus tells them not to go, but they end up going anyways. So this is actually a really short chapter, so we're just going to kind of read and move forward. We are skipping a lot, so you're welcome. Okay. You going to court this morning? Asked Gemini's asking Miss Maudie. We had strolled over. I'm not, she said. I've no business with the court this morning. Aren't you going to go down and watch? Asked Dill. I am not. 'Tis morbid, watching a poor devil on trial for his life. Look at all those folks. It's like a Roman carnival. And it's true. There's a lot of people that are going. Everyone's nosy as to what the outcome's going to be of the trial. So we're going to move forward. So we actually are introduced to a new character. His name is Miss Adolphus Raymond. I want to focus on him for a little bit because we can get a lot of information about compassion about his character, but he basically is a Caucasian, a white male, who sleeps around and has lots of sexual relations with black women, and therefore they produce mixed children. So we're going to read a little bit about that. Jem, said Dill, he's drinking out of a sack. Mr. Adolphus Raymond seemed to be so doing. 2 yellow drugstore straws ran from his mouth to the depths of a brown paper bag. Ain't ever seen anybody do that, murmured Dill. How does he keep what's in it? In it, Jem giggled. He's got a Coca-Cola bottle full of whiskey in there. That's so not to upset the ladies. You'll see him sip it all afternoon. He'll step out for a while and fill it back up. Why is he sitting with the colored folks? Always does. He likes them better, and he likes us, I reckon. Lives by himself way down near the county line. He's got a colored woman and all sorts of mixed children. Show you some of him if we see him. He doesn't look like trash, said Dill. He's not. He owns all one side of the riverbank down there, and he's from a real old family to boot. Then why does he do like that? That's just his way. They say he never got over his wedding. He was supposed to marry one of the Spender ladies, I think. They were going to have a huge wedding, but they didn't. After the rehearsal, the bride went upstairs and blew her head off, shotgun. She pulled the trigger with her toes. I know, it's kind of graphic, but we'll continue. Did they ever know why? No, said Jem. Nobody ever knew quite why but Mr. Adolphus. They said it was because she found out about his colored woman. He reckoned he could keep her and get married too. He's been sort of drunk ever since, you know, though he's real good to those children. Jem, I asked, what's a mixed child? Half white, half colored. You've seen him, Scout. So there'll be a question on homework about this, so take the time to read that, okay? And then read that pink part as well. This kind of talks a little bit more about colored or mixed children. And we'll move on. We were out of luck, and it was all my fault. So basically, they're now in the courthouse. They don't have any seats, anywhere to sit. Everyone downstairs, where all the Caucasians are, have taken up all the room. Jem informed me. We stood miserably by the wall. Can't you all get in? Reverend Sykes, which I don't know if you remember him, he's from Calpurnia's church, was looking down at us, black hat in hand. Hey, Reverend, said Jem. Nah, Scout, here messed us up. Well, let's see what we can do. Reverend Sykes edged his way upstairs. In a few moments he was back. There's not a seat downstairs. Do you all reckon it'll be all right if you all came to the balcony with me? Gosh, yes, said Jem. Happily, we sped ahead of Reverend Sykes to the courtroom floor. There we went up a covered staircase and waited at the door. Reverend Sykes came puffing behind us and steered us gently through the black people in the balcony. 4 N-words rose and gave us their front row seats. The colored balcony ran along 3 walls of the courtroom like a second-story veranda, and from it we could see everything. So Reverend Sykes gives them seats, really good seats. And then you can read this for the last part of that chapter. We're going to move on to chapter 17. This is basically when Heck Tate, the sheriff, is on the stand, and then Bob Yule is on the stand. So we're going to move right in to that. So let me pull it up. There we go. All right, so we're going to skip through straight to where Judge Taylor's is asking Atticus if he has any questions. We're going to skip Mr. Gilmer's questions. He's the one that's trying to represent Mr. Yule and to prove Robinson is guilty. So we're going to just skip to Atticus's part. Yes, said my father. He was sitting behind his table. His chair was skewed to one side. His legs were crossed, and one arm was resting on the back of his chair. Did you call a doctor, Sheriff? Did anyone call a doctor? Asked Atticus. No, sir, said Mr. Tate. Didn't call a doctor. No, sir, repeated Mr. Tate. Why not? There was an edge to Atticus's voice. Well, I can tell you why I didn't. It wasn't necessary, Mr. Finch. She was mighty banged up. Something happened. It was obvious. But you didn't call a doctor? While you were there, did anyone send for one, fetch one, carry her to one? No, sir. So Atticus is kind of emphasizing the fact that Mayella being so banged up, how odd it is that no one called a doctor. Sheriff, Atticus was saying, you say she was mighty banged up. In what way? Well, she didn't. Just describe her injuries, heck. Well, she was beaten around the head. There was already bruises coming up on her arms, and it happened about 30 minutes before. She had a black eye coming. Which eye? And this is where it's really important, because we find out that it is her right eye. He thinks it's her left, but then Atticus says, well, looking at her straight on, what eye? It's her right eye. Her arms were bruised, and she showed me her neck. There were definite finger marks on her gullet, meaning her throat. All around her throat, at the back of her neck? I'll say they were all around, Mr. Finch. You would? Yes, sir. She had a small throat anybody could have reached around with. So now we have that her right side of her face was full of bruises, and her throat was fully grabbed, right? So that's something else that we find out. You're going to read a lot about the Yules and the kind of life they lived. You can read that on your own. There are questions on the homework about that. Now we're going to move on to Mr. Yule when he comes up on the stand. So we are going to just go straight through. Yes, we are skipping a lot. The witness made a hasty descent from the stand and ran smack into Atticus, who had risen to question him. Judge Taylor permitted the court to laugh. Just a minute, sir, said Atticus genially. Could I ask you a question or two? Mr. Yule backed up into the witness chair, settled himself, and regarded Atticus with haughty suspicion, an expression common to Macomb County witnesses when confronted by opposing counsel. Mr. Yule, folks were doing a lot of running that night. Let's see, you say you ran into the house, you ran to the window, you ran inside, you ran to Mayella, you ran for Mr. Tate. Did you, during all this running, run for a doctor? And we find out that no, Mr. Yule decides to not get a doctor. Think about that, guys. Even if you had a child who was raped, that's the first thing, especially as a female, take your daughter to a doctor. But he claims that it was because it was too costly. The next part is, do you agree with his description of Mayella's injuries? Atticus asks Mr. Yulis, and how's that? Atticus looked around at Mr. Gilmer and smiled. Mr. Yule seemed determined not to give the defense the time of day. Mr. Tate testified that her right eye was blackened, that she was beaten around oh yeah, I hold with everything Tate said. So basically, Mr. Yule says, yes, I agree that Mayella's right side of her face was really banged up. After this, Atticus has Mr. Yule read and write. And of course, Mr. Gilmer objects. He says, no, that's not, something you can do. And thankfully, Judge Taylor overrules it. I'll repeat the question. Can you read and write? I most positively can. Will you write your name and show us? I most positively will. How do you think I sign my relief checks? And sure enough, Mr. Yule writes, and you can read this on your own, and he writes with his left hand. So what we find is that Mr. Yule is left hand dominant. And if you were to look at somebody and punch somebody with your left hand, you're more than likely going to hit their right side of the face, not their left, right? If you were to envision punching somebody. So this is really, really strong evidence against the fact Robinson raped Mayella. This is Scout's thoughts. Atticus was trying to show, it seemed to me, that Mr. Yule could have beaten up Mayella. That much I could follow. If her right eye was black and she was beaten mostly on her right side of the face, it would tend to show that a left-handed person did it. But Tom Robinson could easily be left-handed too. We're going to actually learn a little bit more about Tom Robinson in this next chapter as well, which is very eye-opening. So now we're moving on to Mayella's story. So we're going to go ahead and resume because we only have 15 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and move to her. This is where Mr. Gilmore asks her what happened, and we're going to skip some parts for the sake of time, but she basically says she wanted him to come and bust up a chifforobe, which is like a really big piece of furniture that she wanted to get rid of, and as he does that, he comes and attacks her basically and rapes her and beats her and takes advantage of her. Please read this because this is one of the homework questions that talks about how confident Mayella is in her story. And now we're going to move on to when, and please read this too. This kind of also gives more insight of the kind of life that Mayella lives. Very sad and lonely life. And then this is where Atticus begins to ask about how does she love her father? And he asks, and she says, love him? What you mean? I mean, is he good to you? Is he easy to get along with? He does tolerable, except when. And then Atticus says, except when? Mayella looked at her father, who was sitting with his chair tipped against the railing. He sat up straight and waited for her to answer. Except when nothing, said Mayella. I said he does tolerable. Mr. Yule looked back again. Except when he's drinking? Atticus, so gently that Mayella nodded. So she agrees that when he drinks, he is not very kind to her, which says a lot. But then she says, no, he's never touched me. But we can see, you guys, that Mayella is not telling the truth, right? So now he asks her more questions of what happened. Do you remember him beating you about the face? She has a hard time remembering. It goes on. And then this is where Scout sees and notices Tom Robinson's left arm. His left arm was fully 12 inches shorter than his right and hung dead at his side. It ended in a small shriveled hand, and from as far as the balcony I could see that it was no use to him. And this is when Reverend Sykes says a very, very important thing. Reverend Sykes leaned across me and whispered to Jem, he got it caught in a cotton gin, caught it in Mr. Adolphus Raymond's cotton gin when he was a boy, like to bled to death, tore all the muscles loose from his bones. So we find that Robinson doesn't have a working left arm, unfortunately, which does help build his story that he is innocent, that he could not have done all he could do to Mayella. So we're going to move on, and this is where the last bit of questioning happens. Did you scream first at your father instead of at Tom Robinson? Was that it? No answer. Who beat you up, Tom Robinson or your father? No answer. This is pretty much Mayella kind of shutting down. She's unsure of what to say, but at the very end, I want you to read what she says, and it's very close to the movie as well. And of course, she bursts into tears because she's super dramatic, right? And she's obviously not telling the truth. And at the very end, it ends with her on the stand, and then we switch to Tom Robinson the next chapter. So hopefully you get this homework assignment done pretty quickly, and I'll go ahead and post the next one tomorrow as well. Okay, see you in the morning.